A few years back, I took a job at a gas station on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, just a way to pay the bills. I worked the graveyard shift, the hours when no one but truckers and the occasional drifter passed through. It was a lonely job, sitting behind a counter, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the distant rumble of engines. The station itself was old, run down, with flickering lights and a grimy feel. It was tucked away just off the highway, surrounded by fields and empty roads. There wasn't much around, just miles of nothingness. Most nights were quiet, with only the faint crackle of the radio or the ding of the door when someone came in. That night started like any other. I was halfway through my shift, flipping through a magazine, when I noticed something strange. It wasn't anything big, just a weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up from the counter, but the station was empty. The parking lot, too, was deserted, illuminated only by the dim lights above the pumps. I shrugged it off and went back to what I was doing, but the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, creeping up my spine like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I glanced at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, each showing a different angle of the station, 1 inside, 2 outside by the pumps, and 1 overlooking the back of the building. And that's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, just outside the reach of the lights. At first, I thought he was just a customer, maybe a hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down. But the longer I watched, the stranger it seemed. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, barely visible in the shadows, staring at the station. I waited for him to come closer, to step into the light or approach the door, but he didn't. Minutes passed, and he stayed rooted to the same spot, unmoving. It was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was waiting for a ride, or maybe he was just lost. But something about the way he stood so still gave me the creeps. I got up and moved to the window, hoping to get a better look. The man was tall, lanky, dressed in a long coat that fluttered slightly in the wind. His face was obscured by the darkness, and even from where I stood, I couldn't make out any details. I knocked on the glass, trying to get his attention. No response. He didn't even flinch. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Hey, you need help?" Still nothing. That's when I decided to check the cameras again. I walked back to the monitor, half expecting the man to have disappeared. But there he was, still standing in the exact same spot. I stared at the screen for a few moments, unsure of what to do. Should I call the police? What would I even tell them? That some guy was lurking outside? Just as I was about to reach for the phone, something caught my eye. I blinked, leaned closer to the screen. There was no reflection. The camera above the pumps was angled just right so I could see the gas station windows. I could see myself inside the building, standing behind the counter. I could see the lights, the shelves, everything. But the man? He wasn't there. He should have been standing right at the edge of the lot. But the screen showed nothing, just an empty parking lot. I checked the other camera angles, but it was the same. On the monitors, the man didn't exist. My heart started pounding. I looked up at the window again, and there he was, still standing outside. I wasn't imagining it. He was real, but somehow not. A cold sweat ran down my back. Something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. As I waited for them to pick up, I kept my eyes on the man outside, watching for any sudden movement. But he just stood there, staring, not getting closer, not walking away. The line rang and rang, but no one answered. Frustrated, I slammed the phone down and considered locking myself in the back room until morning. That's when the door to the station chimed. I froze. It was the sound of someone coming inside. The bell above the door rang, clear and loud. But when I turned around, the door was still closed. No one had come in. My heart raced and I checked the cameras again. The man was gone from the lot. Couldn't breathe. I ran to the door and locked it, bolting it shut. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired. But then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the station. But there was no one there. I backed up against the wall, clutching the counter, my eyes darting around the empty store. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, until they stopped right in front of me. I held my breath, waiting for anything to happen. But the next sound wasn't footsteps. It was a whisper, just one word, spoken softly, directly into my ear. Leave. That was it. I grabbed my keys, bolted out the back door, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I didn't care if I left the store unlocked. I didn't care if the cameras were still rolling. I just needed to get out of there. I quit the next day. I never went back, never asked what they found on the cameras, or if anyone else saw that man. All I know is that night something wanted me gone, and I was lucky enough to listen. I was driving back from my cousin's house, late at night, on a long stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. My gas light had been on for miles, and I was praying I'd find a station before I was completely stranded. Just when I was starting to panic, I spotted a faint glow ahead. A gas station? Thankfully. It looked like it had been there forever, one of those rundown, old-timey places, but at that moment, it felt like a lifeline. I pulled up to one of the pumps, got out of the car, and took in my surroundings. The place looked deserted, not a single car in sight, and the lights above the pumps flickered weakly. There was a small convenience store attached to the station, its windows dark and dirty, but there was an open sign buzzing faintly in neon red. As I started filling up my tank, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A man was standing by the entrance of the convenience store, barely visible in the shadows. He was tall, wearing an old, dirty coat, and just standing there watching me. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but something about his posture made me uneasy. He didn't move, didn't wave or say anything, just stood there, completely still. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and finished pumping the gas. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, but my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten in hours. Against my better judgment, I decided to go inside and grab a snack for the road. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was stale, like the place hadn't been cleaned in years. The shelves were half empty, filled with expired chips, dusty candy bars, and faded drink bottles. The lights inside flickered just like the ones outside, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything. There was no one behind the counter. I glanced toward the front of the store, expecting to see the man in the coat, but he was gone. The door was still swinging slightly from where I'd come in, but there was no sign of him. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I told myself he had probably just gone to the back. I quickly grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, then headed to the counter. I waited for a few minutes, tapping my fingers nervously, but no one came out. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" Nothing, just silence except for the low hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Growing more uneasy by the second, I decided to leave the money on the counter and get out of there. As I placed the cash down, I heard it, a soft creaking noise coming from the back of the store. It sounded like a door opening, but it was slow, deliberate, like someone was trying to be quiet. I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a narrow hallway at the back of the store, leading to what looked like a storage area. The light in the hallway was dim, barely illuminating the space, but I could make out a figure standing just inside the doorway. It was the man in the coat, only this time I could see his face or what was left of it. His skin was pale, almost translucent, with deep, hollowed-out eyes that seemed to bore right through me. His lips were cracked, twisted into a strange, unsettling smile. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me from the darkness. Panic surged through me, and I took a step back, my mind racing. There was no way he could have gotten back there so quickly. I had just seen him outside, and yet, there he was standing in that hallway, like he had been waiting for me. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I turned and bolted for the door, but just as I reached it, the bell above the door chimed, this time from the outside. Another figure walked in. This one was different, shorter, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned gas station uniform, complete with a cap. His face was as pale as the first man's, his eyes empty, like they had no pupils at all. He stepped inside, blocking my way out, and for a moment, I was trapped between the two of them. The man in the coat had moved now, stepping out of the hallway and toward me, his twisted smile growing wider with every step. The guy in the uniform wasn't smiling, though. His face was blank, expressionless, like a mannequin come to life. Both of them closed in on me, their movements slow but deliberate, like they were in no hurry, because they knew I had nowhere to go. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking, but somehow, I managed to grab a display rack full of snacks and shove it toward the uniformed man. It wasn't much, but it gave me just enough time to dash past him, out the door, and into the night. I didn't stop. I sprinted to my car, threw the door open, and floored it. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them standing in the doorway, watching me leave. But there was nothing, just the empty parking lot, illuminated by those flickering lights. It wasn't until I was miles down the road that I realized I was still holding the bag of chips and the soda. I hadn't paid for them, but I didn't care. All I cared about was getting as far away from that place as possible. I never saw the gas station again. I drove by that stretch of highway a few months later, but there was nothing there. No station, no lights, just an overgrown lot. It was like the place had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere those two men, or whatever they were, are still standing there waiting for the next poor soul to stop for gas. I used to drive for a living, ride-sharing, food delivery, anything that would bring in some extra cash. One night, after a long shift of driving people around, my car was filthy. It had been raining earlier, and the muddy streets had turned my white sedan into a mess. There was a 24-hour car wash on the outskirts of town, and since it was late, I figured I'd swing by and get it cleaned before heading home. The place was a small, automated car wash attached to an old gas station, one of those places that had seen better days. It wasn't busy, obviously. It was close to midnight. The only light came from a couple of flickering street lamps and the dull glow of the car wash sign. I paid at the machine, selected the deluxe wash, figured I might as well go all out, and drove into the bay. The heavy doors slid down behind me with a dull thud, sealing me inside. That was the first moment I felt it, this weird sense of isolation. I was in my car, surrounded by darkness, and the outside world felt very far away. The familiar whirring of the machines started up, and I watched the soap suds spray across the windshield. The rollers kicked in, brushing against the windows. I leaned back in my seat, letting the automated process do its thing. But then, something strange happened. As the water and soap sprayed onto the windshield, there was a brief moment where the foam began to form patterns. Nothing unusual at first, just random streaks and blobs. But then, right in the middle of the windshield, a face appeared. I froze. It wasn't like a reflection or a trick of the light. The foam was shaped into a clear image, a distorted, pale face staring directly at me. The eyes were wide, hollow, and the mouth was stretched open like it was silently screaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The face was gone, just a smear of soap now. I laughed it off nervously. My mind was playing tricks on me, that's all. I was tired, and the late hours were getting to me. The rollers passed over the car, the rhythmic sloshing of water and brushes filling the silence. But then I saw something else. A shadow, moving just outside the car. It was quick, darting from one side of the bay to the other, like someone, or something, was circling the car wash. I looked around, but the doors were closed. There was no way anyone could be in here. Yet, I could have sworn I saw movement, just out of the corner of my eye. The brushes had stopped, and the high-pressure water jets were spraying now, rinsing the car. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and focus on the lights blinking across the dashboard. Just a couple more minutes and I'd be out of there. Then came the knock. At first, I thought I imagined it. A light, almost hesitant knock on the passenger side window. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced over, half expecting to see nothing. But instead, I saw the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass. It was pale, almost translucent, the fingers long and thin. I jumped in my seat, my breath catching in my throat. I stared at the hand, frozen in place, unsure if I should roll down the window or just drive through the door and get out of there. But then the hand slowly slid down the glass, leaving streaks of water and soap behind. The knocking stopped, and the car wash continued as if nothing had happened. The spinning brushes whirred to life again, and water sprayed in every direction. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped inside the car wash, and there was no way out until the machine finished. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every second, and my eyes darted to every corner of the car, searching for more signs of whatever that was. The final part of the wash, the dryers, began to blast hot air across the car, and the doors to the bay slowly opened, revealing the night outside. Relief washed over me. I revved the engine, eager to escape, when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. A woman. Her skin was pale, almost white, and her hair hung wet and stringy over her face. She sat motionless, her head slightly turned toward me, though I couldn't see her eyes. I didn't wait to see what she wanted. I slammed on the gas, speeding out of the car wash and into the empty parking lot. The radio crackled to life as I drove, static filling the car, but I could hear something beneath the noise, whispering. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in the well-lit streets of the city. When I finally pulled over, shaking, I turned around to check the back seat. It was empty. I don't know what I saw that night, and I haven't been back to that car wash since. But every now and then, I'll drive past it. The lights still flicker, and it looks as run down as ever. But I swear, every time I pass by, I feel that same eerie presence watching me. And every time I drive just a little bit faster,